dip into this Secretary of State Antony Blinken news conference with the foreign minister of Cairo. They're talking about a hostage deal and a ceasefire. Let's listen.
Second, there's an agreement, as you heard from Minister Shukri, on the urgent need to surge and sustain humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza. Children should not be dying of malnutrition in Gaza or anywhere else for that matter. 100% of the population of Gaza is experiencing severe levels of acute food insecurity. We must not allow that to continue. Now, the ceasefire that we're working on would be the best, most immediate way to enable us to surge humanitarian assistance, but it's not the only way. Regardless, we have to be doing that. We've seen some improvement over the last couple of weeks in getting humanitarian assistance to Palestinians, but it's not enough. And as I said, we need to really surge and sustain the assistance across land, across sea, and across air. We have senior officials meeting today in Cyprus to coordinate the international efforts on the maritime corridor. And that includes support for the U.S. military mission to construct a pier, a temporary pier, as an additional channel for aid. But as I said before, and I want to emphasize, this maritime corridor and this pier is a complement to, not a substitute for, other means of getting assistance to people who need it. And in particular, the land crossings are the most critical means of getting aid to those in need. As Minister Shukri said, we agreed today, all of the ministers, that we would get our experts together in the coming days to identify the urgent, practical, and concrete steps that can and should be taken to increase the flow of assistance. Israel needs to do more. Tomorrow, I'll be talking to our partners about how to coordinate our efforts. As the foreign minister mentioned as well, we also discussed Rafah. We all share concerns. There are more than 1 million people in Rafah, many of whom were displaced from other parts of Gaza. A major ground operation there would mean more civilian deaths. It would worsen the humanitarian crisis. There is a better way to deal with the threat, the ongoing threat posed by Hamas. Third, we discussed and agreed on the need for long-term peace and security. This discussion very much consistent with the principles that I laid out in Tokyo many months ago, that Gaza cannot be used as a platform for terrorism. There can be no displacement of its population. There can be no reoccupation by Israel. And we also agreed that this requires a path to 2 states with real security guarantees for Israel. In turn, this also requires real reform of the Palestinian Authority. And we've seen some initial steps in that direction. More is needed. Revitalizing the PA with a better, more representative government, including Palestinians from Gaza, is critical to achieving the vision of a Gaza unified with the West Bank under Palestinian Authority. If and as the Palestinian Authority pursues reform, I'm also convinced that the region will strongly support it. Regional integration is one of the building blocks of lasting peace and lasting security. And that includes normalization for Israel with its neighbors. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to meet again with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as with the foreign minister. And we had a very good discussion about the work that we've been doing for many months now on normalization, and that work is moving forward. We're continuing to make good progress. I believe we can reach an agreement which would present a historic opportunity for 2 nations, but also for the region as a whole. So I think if you look back on these past couple of months, since I was here in January, we have been working very closely together with our Arab partners on all of these post-conflict pieces. There's not only more consensus on the priorities, ceasefire, release of hostages, humanitarian assistance, and a clear pathway and plan for the future. I think there's increasingly consensus on the steps needed to achieve that. These are difficult days, but that only reinforces our determination to get to better days. Thank you.
هنفتح المجال لسؤالين لكل وزير.
So Antony Blinken there, the Secretary of State, saying that, again, they are very concerned about what might happen in Rafah if the Israelis do end up bombarding and going in. They've mentioned over and over again there are so many civilians there, so many Gazans who have been displaced. They are very concerned about what might happen to them. They think that there is a better way. Obviously, this administration has invited Benjamin Netanyahu to send a team to Washington to try to figure out a better plan going forward. They do agree with the rooting out of Hamas. They don't think Hamas can be viable any longer in Gaza. They don't see that as a path forward. He was also there talking about strengthening the Palestinian Authority and adding Gazans to that authority. Some in the region might say that that's a bit of a pipe dream. Let's bring in NBC's senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what else stood out to you?
Well, Katie, certainly some of the most pointed language we've heard so far from Secretary of State Blinken with regards to the Israel-Hamas war. Something else that stood out to me, he said children should not be dying of malnutrition in Gaza. Now, it seems obvious where we are at this point, but Katie, if you remember in the early weeks of this war, the Biden administration took great pains to say it did not want to tell Israel what to do regarding its military operation in Gaza. But of course, we have seen that shift dramatically in the last few weeks. Just a few days ago, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan saying that it would be a mistake for Israel to go into Rafah. And right here, we heard it again from Secretary of State Blinken. And this all comes as the U.S. is submitting this resolution calling for a sustained ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. That is different language than what the U.S. has said before with regards to a temporary ceasefire. Of course, that resolution is still tied to the release of hostages. But as you heard from the Secretary of State, Katie, he also had some sharp words when it comes to any potential military operation from Israel into Rafah, saying that there has to be a better way to deal with Hamas. Katie.
Gabe, what do we know about the Israelis sending over a group of people to Washington to try and work out a better way forward? Is there any timetable for that?
Well, that's supposed to happen, and as we understand it, soon, Katie. And we also hear that House Speaker Mike Johnson, of course, here in Washington, says that he plans to invite Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu potentially to speak in front of a joint session of Congress. But this all comes as this growing friction between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government in Israel. And you're hearing it just there from those most pointed comments yet from Secretary of State Blinken.
Talking about Netanyahu going around President Biden speaking directly to Congress. He's done that before at the Republicans' invitation. And there are those out there, including the former head of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, who have been urging Biden and the administration to do the same to Bibi Netanyahu, to go around him and either speak directly to the Knesset or to give a speech in Israel about the path forward. We're listening to questions right now for the Foreign Minister and for Secretary of State Antony Blinken. If any news is made, we will bring it to you. Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, thank you very much.